Welcome, everybody. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. Um, I'm so glad we're doing this topic again, covering this topic. We did a program, this same topic, in the spring of last year and had terrific turnout, terrific engagement, lots of really good questions and lots of good conversation. So we need to do more of this and more frequently and more support as much as possible for siblings and for parents who are trying to figure out how to navigate relationships with that our children have with each other and us with them and all of that. So you're going to hear a lot more about that tonight, but it's just really and truly such an important topic. And I really want to thank the Chester County Department of Drug and Alcohol Services. They are one of our county partners, one of our funders, and we love Chester County so much. But if you're not in Chester County, that is totally fine. They know that people join us from far and wide, which is awesome, and glad that Zoom allows us to do that from time to time. About half of our programs are in person these days, but we're keeping a good presence on Zoom as well, because it definitely helps when we have some folks who are from outside of our region, which is the Philadelphia area. We will have time at the end. You're going to hear from these three presenters, and after that, we will definitely open up for Q&A. You all notice as you joined that this program is being recorded. We will not be keeping anything in the recording. I will edit out before we post this on YouTube, anything that has your name, your face, your question, that will all land on the cutting room floor. We may, if the answer is something that is able to be shared without identifying anybody, that might be part of it, but certainly please feel free to ask a question. Anything personal is going to be cut out of the finished product. So I just wanted to assure everyone about that. You will also see a survey come up at the end of this. And I'm going to ask you to please take a moment to take that survey. It pops up at the end of the program. And we don't get a lot of response when we're doing this on Zoom. I don't know if it's tricky when people are like just ready to get off and their device and be done with it, but it helps us so much to hear from you. We really love your feedback. So I'm going to make an extra impassioned plea for that tonight. Thank you for that in advance. The follow-up page for tonight's topic is conversation.zone/siblings, and I'm going to put all of this in the chat in just a moment. That is where you'll find the recording of this program, and we already have a lot of resources on that page that hopefully will be helpful to you. And anything that our guests tonight have that they want to share that they think would be a helpful additional support, I'll add that to that follow-up page so that you can access that at any time. All of these programs and more can be found on our website, conversation.zone/calendar. Hope you'll check that out. We also have a YouTube channel with about 140 programs like tonight's that are recorded and available on a variety of these kinds of topics. We also have parent support group meetings called Parent Partnership. These are absolutely a gift in my life, and I believe so, and for a lot of other families, because we're up to 21 meetings a week now that are under this banner, and half of them are on Zoom and about half are in person. And you can go to this page on our website, find this calendar, click on the meeting, and it'll give you the details if it's in person of where it is. If it's on Zoom, it'll give you either the link or an email on how to get the link. And finally, we have a family recovery course. All these things are free to attend, by the way, including this family recovery course. It's a 3-part course that is peer-led by people like me and people like my colleague Judy Hirsch, who's on here as well. We'll have 2 instructors for each course. We have lots of them coming up that are on this page of our website, conversation.zone/FRC. It's 3 weeks in a row. So 3 Tuesdays in a row, 3 Mondays in a row, whichever day it starts on. Really helps us to understand what happened to our loved one with this addiction that they're struggling with, what happened to our family. We're definitely going to be talking about family tonight. And then how can I, as a family member, recover for life? Like, how can I have a healthy boundary going forward with my loved one, take care of myself, and hopefully pave the way for my loved one to find their own recovery. So I'm so excited to introduce our 3 speakers this evening, starting with Mallory Henry. I think, Mallory, you're going to be going first. Mallory's with Care and Treatment Center. I'm going to ask each of you to tell a little bit about yourselves and your background professionally, and then, of course, personally, because you're all here because you have some skin in the game on this topic. So Mallory is a sibling. Maddie Amrad is a sibling as well, and Liz Tankel is a parent, and she's going to be talking about that role with regard to her two children. So I think we are starting with Mallory. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Mallory.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. My name is Mallory Henry. I am a sibling of a person who suffers from substance use disorder, who currently is in long-term recovery. I will talk a little bit tonight just about my story and what that kind of has looked like as a sibling. I also work for Care and Treatment Centers within their Education Alliance. My role really is to provide prevention and early intervention. Really passionate about that, obviously, because as a sibling, I hope that I can help family members kind of early on in the process and get involved and connect them to services and resources and things like this in terms of education early. I also facilitate Karen's regional family services. So my goal is working with families, providing workshops, specifically on tangible topics related to family recovery. So I'm just going to really kind of share a little bit about what it was like growing up with a sibling and kind of talk about what family recovery means to me, specifically as a sibling. So I want to start by sharing a little poem, which was actually provided to me by a parent partnership leader who I believe is on here. So she knows who she is. And when she shared this with me, it was one of the first times I actually felt seen and heard and kind of validated in my feelings. So this is called I Am the Other Child. And it says, I am the other child, the okay one. I am the sober child, the one on the sidelines. I am the observer, the one watching him slowly killing our parents. I am the angry one, the one who's pissed because he's destroying our family. I am the sad one, the one who's losing her first best friend. I am the reassuring one, the one holding her mama as she cries. I am the torn one, the broken one trying to hold everyone together. I am the confused one, the one who wonders how I became so unimportant and invisible. I am the other child, the okay one. So when I first heard that, it really, really resonated with me because it really, really puts into context exactly what I was feeling. So when I was in college, I really realized that my brother struggled with a substance use disorder. It started much earlier than that. My brother started using substances probably around 13, progressed pretty quickly, and then was really pronounced, and he was really struggling when he was a teenager. At that time, I lived away from home. I was going to college. But I remember the night kind of it all really hit me really vividly. I was home from college, and my brother and our bedroom shared a wall, and I heard his cell phone dinging, 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 and it was annoying me. So I went in to tell him to turn it off, and he was asleep, and I picked up the phone just to silence it and caught a glimpse of the text that was on the screen. And the text, alluded to him using substances, but also potentially distributing substances. And I remember in that moment was the first time I felt, who is my allegiance to? Right. So is it to my brother? Should I wake him? Should I tell him I saw this? Should I tell him how concerned I am? Or is my allegiance to my parents? And should I be going to them and expressing concern? And I slept on it and ultimately decided to go to my parents. And I remember that being an incredibly challenging decision. And when I did go to my parents and express my concern, they immediately denied it. They were like, there's no way, not our kid, not possible. We live in a good neighborhood. He goes to a good school. We're married. It can't possibly be your brother. And, ultimately felt that my feelings weren't valid, right? My concerns weren't valid. My feelings weren't valid. And that kind of became a trend as, the substance use progressed. And ultimately, as it did progress, I really kind of put a pause on our relationship. I didn't really contact my brother I didn't see him. If I was home, I'd kind of avoid times that he would be home, and I'd come home at a different time. Um, and at that time, my parents were also really struggling to set appropriate boundaries. Ultimately ended up divorcing during the time of my brother's active addiction, because they really, kind of really tore them apart in terms of differences related to boundaries and, holding him accountable and things like that. And one thing during that time, I think that really was poignant to me as a sibling was my parents felt so much shame associated with my brother struggling that they did not want to share outside the family. They didn't even want to share with our extended family. It became this kind of shameful secret that only like the four of us knew. And they were not willing to share. And I think part of that then elevated me to the role of a co-parent. So my parents would call me, when my brother was missing or when he would get in trouble at school. I was kind of that third parent in the dynamic of someone to vent to, or, someone to ask, hey, what do you think we should do in this situation? And in hindsight, I'm like, I'm the sibling. I'm not a parent. But I think I was placed in that role partly because of the shame that's associated with it. And talking and working with a lot of siblings now, a lot of siblings feel similarly. They've kind of become this third parent in the situation of, kind of being elevated to make decisions and be a sounding board for things that probably really aren't ours to think about. I was thinking about this today, actually, and I was thinking, like, if my brother had, diabetes, would my parents be talking to me about his treatment plan, or should we do a pump or not a pump? Probably not. But when it was substance use, I became kind of elevated into that role, and, ultimately created a lot of anxiety for me, and kind of my own mental health suffered as a sibling, because, when my phone would ring and it would be my parents, there was this like pit in the stomach of, were they going to tell me something was wrong? Were they going to tell me he was missing? Were they going to tell me he was dead? Like I really didn't know. And, anytime that phone rang, that anxiety was really provoked in me. And I think what another thing that did to me, and I think a lot of siblings can relate, is, we take on these roles in our family. And I know for me, I became the role of this perfectionist. Like I had to do everything right. I had to get perfect grades. I had to do well in school. I had to go to the right college. I had to get a job so I could help pay for college, because I knew my parents couldn't be burdened with another sibling who was struggling. So I felt this immense pressure to be perfect because my parents were at bandwidth. Right? They couldn't take on another sick child. They couldn't take on another child that had any needs, because they were really laser focused on my brother. And I think that really, really had a lot of consequences in terms of kind of that family system at play. My brother ultimately got arrested at the age of 18. And while he was incarcerated, my parents finally came together and set a firm boundary that they were going to send him to treatment. And if he declined, that they would keep him to continue his sentence. Ultimately, I'm grateful that he decided to go to treatment. And, within that treatment, and my brother had gone to treatment prior, this was a longer stay treatment. And it was really good for him. And my brother did really, really well, and he was really successful. But in that time, as a sibling, I was not provided anything. I wasn't provided education. I wasn't invited to family sessions. My parents were, but I was not. And quite honestly, I think during that first bout, my brother had about 5 years of sobriety, and then he had a pretty substantial relapse. And I really, really, in hindsight, believe that relapse was because none of us did any work. We thought if my brother did all the work, he would be fine, and then our family would be fine. And I think that relapse was really eye-opening, because it really made us realize, you know what, we have to do this too. So my brother actually ended up at Cairn after his relapse. I am very, very incredibly grateful to have worked for Cairn during that time. And Cairn has a program called the Employee Campaign Scholarship, which actually asks employees to donate a portion of their paycheck, their little measly nonprofit paycheck, to scholarship that allows for employees, family, and friends to attend Cairn if need be. And my brother was able to attend the relapse program for free of charge, which was amazing, because my parents had exhausted all financial means to get him in the treatment the first time. And when he was at Cairn, my family and I attended the family engagement program. And that was really the first time I was even invited to the table. just to say, you don't have to come, but you're invited. And I remember feeling so strongly about that, like, oh, wow, they see me as a part of this. And ultimately that education, my family got there and I got there, and, just through family therapy and family sessions, and my brother really holding us accountable to our own recovery as well, really helped us kind of work on our own process. And I kind of call that, like, I always look at it as like different paths. So each one of my 4 family members, we're all on our own path. My brother walks his path and I don't get to control it. I tried, it doesn't work, right? So he walks his path and he does his meetings and he has his therapy and he has his support network. And, he walks his path, and we might walk ours at different speeds, but we also have to do the work. So, I took a little bit longer, I think, to decide that I needed to do some work too, because I really spent a lot of time blaming my brother. But in my own work, finding therapists, providing education, sibling support groups, finding a network, has really allowed me to kind of work, through my own recovery. And one of the things I do now, through Karen, is I facilitate a sibling support group that meets virtually once a month. And that is such an important network to me, because I think we can talk, we can laugh. Sometimes people say things and I'm like, it's not funny, but it is, because sometimes our only way to get through it is humor. But one of the analogies I just want to end with related to my story was, at a sibling support group a couple months ago, someone gave me this analogy that has really stuck with me. And they said that, a bird doesn't land on a tree branch, knowing if that it can hold its weight. It lands on the tree branch, not worried, because it knows if the branch breaks, it can fly. And I think of that now a lot. I kind of picture my family on a tree and we all are on a different branch. And if my brother's branch breaks, which it could be a reality, right? Sometimes relapse is part of the process. I know that I'll be okay. Like, it doesn't break my branch if his breaks. And I have a lot of faith and trust that if my brother's branch breaks, he knows what to do. He's done an amazing job working his own recovery. But I also know that I will be okay, because I've worked my own recovery and I have a support network and I have really good people in my life. I've received a lot of education. I've received a lot of support. And I have a group of siblings around me who know what it's like and can also hold me accountable, to do what I need to do if something were to ever happen. So that's my share. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mallory.
Of course.
I love hearing your story. That's beautiful. I really appreciate it. And you mentioned your support group that you help out with it. I love that. And it's on our follow-up page. So if people want to access that, your contact and all of that. So yes, great. Wonderful. Maddie Amrad, would you like to unmute and share?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie. And I just want to thank you, Mallory, for sharing your story, because as a fellow sibling, I definitely related to a lot of it. And I thank everyone for letting me be here tonight to share my story as well, as a sibling. And I think the poem is so accurate, because I do think that the siblings of those who struggle with addiction are definitely the invisible. They call us the invisible children, because so much of treatment is focused on the parent and the person who is struggling with addiction. But of course, the siblings are also a really big part of what the family's going through as well. So I'll just share a little bit about my story, but I'll start by saying that I myself am a therapist. So I work in the addiction space at Ethos Treatment with the lovely Mike Blanche, who is one of the founders of Ethos Treatment. So I work with teenagers who are struggling with addiction and mental health concerns, which has been a really interesting part of my healing journey, I guess, as a sibling of someone who has struggled with addiction. So I'm a therapist and I do work with kids in the teenagers in the day-to-day who are actively struggling with all these things that we're talking about tonight. So I'll just preface by saying that. But I'll share a little bit about my story as a sibling. So I grew up on the main line. I went to Conestoga High School, which, as many of us know, is a place of a lot of privilege and a lot of people on the outside being really successful and doing really well. I think that my family definitely at least growing up, felt like a very cookie cutter positive family. My mom was a stay-at-home parent. My father worked, and we just kind of had a very positive, at least from what I remember, a very positive childhood. And I remember growing up, my whole life, like things would happen and I might have struggles, but I remember my family was a place that I could go back to and feel supported. So like even if, drama at school or struggling academically or something like that, I always felt like my family was a very connected, supported space. Of course, we had our own issues, but just kind of like having that strength was something that was really important to me growing up. But then, of course, when I was at Conestoga High School, my younger brother was also at Conestoga, and he was, as many people might relate to, my brother. He was a lovely young man. He was very likable. I remember he went to in middle school, he won like student of the month, and he was very positive, and he had a lot of friends and was likable, and he was just kind of like such a lovely person. And then I remember when I was a senior in high school, he was a 10th grader. And I just remember the way he was acting was changing so much. And um, the way he was treating me, the way he was treating my parents was just like so out of character. And I think that was probably the beginning of the pain because I was watching this person who I loved so much and like saw in such positive light, like really changing his behavior. Um, and I guess fortunately, maybe unfortunately for my parents, my older sister and I were very cookie cutter young teenagers. We didn't really participate in substance use. So when we found out that my brother was using substances, I think it was a really big shock to our family. I don't think my parents really knew how to handle it because, like I said, my older sister and I, maybe we had been to parties a few times or things like that, but we never got really involved in that part of the high school experience of substance use and abuse. And it turns out that his struggle with being addicted to cannabis was just like consuming his whole life. And he ended up, this young man who began high school, with so much going for him, he ended up leaving Conestoga High School because he was struggling so much. And he did a wilderness program, a treatment program, which was just like very shocking for my family. I think if you had said a year later this was going to happen, it would be crazy for us to think about because we weren't that family. We weren't that family that struggled with these things, right? We had all the positive family connections and things like that. Um, and like Mallory mentioned, it was part of that wilderness program was a lot of family work just with the parents and with the child. So it was not related with my sister and myself of like how we were involved with what he was struggling with. And in the following maybe 7, 8, 9 years, my brother has been in a lot of different treatment programs. And every single one of them did not involve sibling work of how that experience affected us and different things like that. And similar to what Mallory said, I think something that's so accurate is just feeling like you're pulled between allegiance to your sibling and allegiance to your parents because you don't know which person to support in the moment. You don't know who you should give your trust to and different things like that. As parents, I'm sure many of you have struggled with not knowing if your child is using again or different things like that. And I think if you're a sibling living with the person who is struggling with addiction, you find yourself going similar to a parent struggling with, is my sibling using again? Why is their behavior changing? Different things like that. Do I talk to mom about this? How do I, work with this? And it's really painful, causes a lot of anxiety and causes a lot of strife with between the siblings, between me and my brother, because how could I be the one who, got him into trouble again? And then, of course, I had a lot of resentment that my brother was making these choices because, as the poem also references, you watch how these experiences with their addicted child is like really affecting my parents' health. And I had a lot of resentment of how could you pick up again if this is going to negatively affect our parents in such a way? How could you do this? This doesn't make any sense to me as someone who isn't struggling with addiction. So there's a lot of resentment there. And I think that similar to what Mallory was sharing as well, I think I think that siblings cope in many different ways. Like maybe some siblings will actually end up struggling with addiction themselves because they don't know how to cope with the negative emotions of anxiety and fear and grief for their sibling. I personally sort of took on the role of being the perfect daughter. I felt like I was in college for a lot of the time that my brother was in treatment as well. And I felt like I couldn't call home and say, I'm struggling with this thing, or I feel like I have my own um, problems because I didn't want to put any more of that weight onto my parents of that, so I was always good, right? I'm fine. And I know that my older sister as well sort of took on that path of being um, more of a perfect kid. And I think that what's difficult about that is that I think that the person who's struggling with addiction themselves can also grow resentful of feeling like there's such a divide between that person, who they are, and then their siblings who are like these perfect children because there's such a difference, right? Like my brother's going to rehab and I am getting straight A's or like going to this fancy school or different things like that. But I think it's kind of how it's definitely how I personally coped with what I was dealing with was kind of like controlling what I could control and channeling that pain and struggle. But I think maybe 2 years ago, I did a family therapy session with my brother, and he said one of his great pains going through everything that he went through was that he felt like he was the only one who had suffering and had pain. And he felt like he was the one who was like, I'm sure many people who've been in treatment before or these different settings before have heard of what it's called the identified patient of like this person is the one who's sick and everyone else is fine. Like they're not the ones who struggle. And I think that it might have been helpful for him for me to share my own experiences of struggle, whether it was, maybe I was struggling in a class or didn't know what I wanted to do, or, different things like that, of like making him feel more normal because I myself also had different things that I was going through. Um, and so I think what, like I mentioned before, I mean, I could talk about this forever, but one of the great pains of my experience with my brother's addiction is that it really affected my mom. I think there's a very common dynamic where the mother takes on the role of being the savior, getting involved in treatment. I personally, when I do a lot of family sessions, it is often the mother who's the most active in the treatment process. And I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons why that might be, but I think for that reason, the emotional pain that you witness, particularly your mother go through, is very, very challenging. And I think that a lot of parents think that they just need to do everything for their children and channel that their worry and fear into focusing on what their kids need. But I think that for all the parents that are listening, I think one of the greatest things you can do, and it might feel like the most impossible thing to do, is to get support for yourself and find space for yourself to get support, because that's actually what's going to be healthier for the family system. But anyways, part of my family story is that my mother, who never struggled with alcohol ever in her entire life, she maybe in my whole childhood, I've watched her drink a handful of times, actually grew to struggle with alcoholism herself because she was so overwhelmed by the pain, the emotional pain of dealing with her addicted son. And obviously, having two family members of a family of five in active addiction is very painful and stressful. And having the mother figure, who's the anchor of the family, sort of like almost go like her ship sank. I mean, it made the whole situation way more difficult. And I think that that was probably the greatest piece of resentment and anger that I had for my brother was I felt like his decisions and choices were so negatively affecting his mother, who was the person who was his ultimate champion and sort of like warrior through this whole thing. But of course, I do think that in my family story, having my mom end up needing to get addiction treatment herself, which was once again a person who's never struggled with substance use. So it was another shock to our family. I think that that was the biggest wake up call for our family to say, we can't do this how we're doing it anymore. This is not working. And whether my brother chooses to continue in his journey of using and continuing to have these really unhealthy coping skills and we need to change. And I think that that was a big And my mom also woke up to the fact that she needs to care for herself as well. And it's definitely full circle because my mom attends at one of the biggest things that she said changed um, her own journey of recovery and of sort of our family's addiction journey was to be a part of the conversation parent partnership group. I don't think she attended one for maybe 5 or 6 years until into her journey. She's like, I wish I was here year one. Hearing stories from parents and everything that they were going through and all the insight that they had and understanding and empathy was major in helping her and my dad have way better approaches to enabling and not enabling and making different choices. Because I think often in this experience of having an addicted loved one, you often feel like your intuition is telling you the opposite of what you should be doing. And I think people that attend Al-Anon family groups and different things like that, you can definitely see how sometimes all you want to do is be there for the person that you love. And I remember I used to like do all these crazy things for my brother. Like I thought that if I made him lunch every day, that would help him, or different crazy things like that. And then you go to an Al-Anon group and they're like, nope, that's enabling. So yeah. But anyways, just to sum up my whole story, my mother and my brother are sober and in recovery journeys. I think my mom celebrated 3 years of sobriety this month, which is amazing. And same with probably pretty similar timeline for my brother. But I would just wrap it all up to say that the biggest thing that you can do as a family, as Mallory also mentioned, is to bring this disease and struggle into the light and reach out for support. And of course, to people that you trust. There's a lot of shame in this disease. I think that telling trusted people in your life that you're going through this is really what helps people heal and recover, going to support groups, helping your children who are not addicted also find places of support, whether that is therapy or encouraging them to speak with trusted people in their life that might be going through something similar. I think that's so important. And really a part of this journey is just learning like you have to care for yourself if you can be there for your loved one who is struggling with addiction. I remember one of the treatments that one of my family members did was attending Karen. And one of the biggest things that I learned in a family education program was that you can't go out on the ice to save your loved one. I don't know if anyone's learned about that metaphor, but you think that when your loved one's under the ice, or if they're out on a big sheet of ice and they fell through the ice, you think that the way to save them is to go out on the ice with them. But the real way to save them is to stay on stable ground and find ways to reach out to them out on the ice in different ways. So I remind myself a lot of that in my day-to-day life. Don't go out on the ice, different things like that. I don't know if I properly explained that, but just to wrap it all up, I think I'm very passionate about sharing my story because I do think that siblings are the ones who can definitely be forgotten about. And I think that we're definitely a big piece of the recovery journey of how to make the family system healthier and make our loved ones feel less alone. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Beautifully said. That was beautiful. And I love that metaphor as well. I think that's Sarah from Karen Treatment Center that does it. Yeah, she's awesome. Martinez. Yeah. Thank you very much, Maddie. Liz Tankel, and I apologize to you through. I just looked back at Bob's email and I messed up the order. So my apologies. Liz, you are up, my friend.
The first thing I want to say is thank you for having me here. I am always so excited about Kim's programs because when I was going through our family struggle, nothing like this existed. We were in a desert. We were in literally a support desert. And we were at the very, very beginning of the opioid epidemic. I sometimes call myself the original gangster mother of opioid addiction. I also call myself the Hester Prynne of heroin, if you remember the Scarlet Letter. I was one of I think, certainly on the main line, the first mom of someone addicted to heroin to speak publicly about it. And it was such a shocking thing in that time that someone on the Realtors Board of Chester County called me and said, please stop talking about heroin because you're going to make property values go down. And I said, I am? I'm that powerful? Now I'm really going to talk about heroin. So I've been riding this wave since our oldest son, Eric, began using drugs probably around 2000, and he got clean in 2006. So we have been at this game for a long, long, long time. So our story, our family story, is that when I had my first son, I had kidney disease, and our being pregnant with him almost killed me. So my doctor was really pushing for me to tie my tubes on the table. They had just taken my baby. I was 25, and my doctor said, you should never have another pregnancy. It will kill you. And I said, but don't you think that medical technology will improve in my reproductive lifetime? So he obviously didn't think so, but I held tight, and I knew that someday I would probably get to have another child. And 9 years later, a drug was developed to treat my condition. My new doctor said you can have a safe pregnancy. Got pregnant again, and the drug was withdrawn in my 3rd month of pregnancy before I even had a chance to take it. So when I had my second son, they took him 3 weeks early because I was literally dying on my feet. And he was born, and then a few weeks later, I went into a coma for 2 weeks. And that was that initial trauma for my oldest son, who had really wanted a brother. And now the brother that he really wanted almost ended my life. So there was enough trauma to go around with that. And later on, my oldest son, who was 9 at the time, when he discovered pot and later OxyContin, and after that heroin, it really spoke to him and soothed him in a way that nothing else could. Meanwhile, this little baby that I had is growing up in a situation where his brother is really going off the rails. By the time Ethan was 4 and his brother was 13, a lot of these bad behaviors were starting. Eric started using drugs when he was 14. So the little sibling was exposed to addiction almost from the time that he was really aware, and it had a tremendous impact on him. Keep in mind that this is happening between, I was in the coma in 1994. So we're at the very, very beginning of all of these drug epidemics that no one was talking about, and certainly no one on the main line had any experience with. So I felt like a pioneer. I felt like the Magellan of mothering an addict. I was really on my own. So as our little son was growing up, he's in the house with a deranged lunatic, and who had deranged lunatic friends. So Eric's friends were scary, they were older, and they were really disruptive to Ethan's life. So Ethan grew up with this deep resentment for his brother. And my challenge was, I loved Eric so much and I wanted him to get well, but I had to honor the discomfort that my younger son was experiencing on a daily basis. So it's with the relationship with a sibling and between siblings is so different from the way that a mother feels. Mothers have this unlimited love for all of their children. I don't know how we do it, how we have this unlimited well of patience and love and respect for all of our children, whether you're a woman who has 2 children or 20 children. And yet here I have a situation in my family where one child is making the life of the other child a living hell. And it was one thing for my life to be made a living hell from this, but it was another to make the life of this innocent little boy a living hell. So my best advice to parents is to let the sibling vent. Let them say, I can't stand this person. I even hate this person. They have a right to their feelings. And I never negated his feelings or invalidated his experience. I always said, you have a right to feel that way. I get it. I just can't feel that way with you. So, so this went on for a few years. We had 6 years of addiction. And finally, when Eric was 20, he, hit his bottom and went to treatment. And again, I can't stress this enough. It was the Stone Age for treatment. We had to be on a waiting list to get treatment, and our insurance wouldn't pay for it because he didn't meet their criteria for inpatient treatment. So there were, like, at that time, maybe 4 treatment centers in all of Pennsylvania. On the day that he agreed to go to treatment, I got on the phone and I called treatment centers from upstate New York to Connecticut, and I could not find a bed. And finally, it happened to be my birthday. I kept saying, "Happy birthday, Liz." And so finally I called Miramont and I said, "Listen, it's my birthday. Can you help me?" And the woman said, "If you can be here in 45 minutes, we can help you." And we didn't even pack a suitcase. I took a suitcase and I threw it in the car, and then I gathered up all his clothes and I threw them in the car. And my husband hopped in our car and he drove that car like he stole it all the way up to Bensalem. And Eric found a place. So in this journey, and Ethan Tangle wrote a beautiful essay, which is on this very website. I encourage you to look at it. It's about that day, about his brother making the decision to go to treatment. And it was a story that was published in his school's literary magazine. And they did a literary magazine for 7th graders. And they said, the prompt was, talk about something that was important in your life. And he wrote about his brothers going to treatment. And we laughed because I think the first sentence was, the sounds in the kitchen sounded like they were sounds that were coming up from the ground, like from hell or something like this. And all the other stories in the literary magazine were like, the day we got our puppy, or when I caught the biggest fish, or grandma's perfume. And so when he submitted his story, which was pretty graphic, school called me and they said, we cannot publish this because it's too disturbing. We can't have this. Like, this isn't what we meant. I said, hey, that's not what you specified in your prompt. You asked for something important and he delivered. They said, well, we just can't publish it. And I said, if you don't publish this story, I'm going to pull my kid from this school. And I'm going to tell everybody why. So they did, they published it. And I got so many calls from other parents saying, thank you. Like, the support was shocking. I was expecting to be run out of town with a pitchfork. And the love and support, and people still talk to me about that essay. So that's one thing. You've got to, despite popular opinion or what people are going to say, let the kid have their say. Let them express their feelings. So our oldest son went to treatment and did very, very well. And again, we were in the dark ages of treatment. It was 2006. It was in the dark ages of the internet. We had a dial-up modem. So as I was doing my research, I had to wait, and it would be like, waiting for the sounds. And even having access to that tool was amazing. Like, I would type in treatment centers, and slowly, the list would come up. But I was just in awe of this new tool that we had. So when I'm telling my story, I want you to see it within that context of something that happened in the dark ages of everything. So he went to treatment. He went to 10 days of detox. followed by, I think, 3 months in a wilderness treatment center. It could have been 2. I don't remember exactly. Followed by 9 months in a sober house, followed by 2.5 years in sober college. And from there, I set definite boundaries with him. I said, you cannot see this house. You cannot come back to the main line. You have to stay in Minnesota and start a life there, and we'll come and visit you. But we need our space, and we need to heal and grow here. And he did. He stayed in Minnesota for 2.5 years, and then he asked if he could come back, and we felt at that time that it was time that he could come back. In the interim, Ethan was 13 when Eric went to treatment. And Eric was the first kind of family vacation we went on. We all met in Puerto Rico. And Eric was 22. And he said, it was the first time we had all been like together as a family. We had been seeing him in bits and pieces while he was in the treatment process, but Ethan hadn't gone to see him. So we went to Puerto Rico, and Eric said, I would like to take him to fly a kite. I want to do some things with him that I didn't get a chance to do with him when he was, a kid. And I want to have that experience. And my husband and I were like, can we trust Eric to take Ethan somewhere? Like, what if something happens? What if he relapses in Puerto Rico? What if, but we had to say, you know what? We have to all trust each other. This is the beginning of building new trust. And Ethan was very reluctant. Like, he was really kind of frosty at the beginning. And I said to him, do whatever makes you comfortable. You do not have to go. But if you do go, you might learn something about your brother that surprises you. And they went, and they had the best time. And they still have the kite. And it's been 18 years. Like, that kite is a family relic. I think that, when we die and they're dipping a kite in half, one will take one half of that kite and the other one will take the other half. So I said, and Eric was so happy that it had gone well. And I said, this is the first step. You are going to have to date your brother. You're going to have to woo him because you owe it to him. And he has wooed him every single day since then. He's absolutely devoted to him. Another early experience was Eric was in a sober living program at college in Minnesota, and Ethan was 14. This is the next year. And Eric said, I'd really like him to come and stay with me at college. So I said, sure. So we put Ethan on a plane by himself, and he flew out to Minneapolis alone and spent a whole week with his brother. And people were shocked. All my friends were like, are you crazy? You're sending your 14-year-old son out to be with his brother who had been addicted to drugs? And I said, yeah, but he's in a sober program. I cannot think of a safer place for a 14-year-old boy to be than a sober program at a Lutheran college. So they had just a magical time, a wonderful, wonderful time. And it was these experiences that were not curated by me that allowed them to be the brothers and the men that they are now, the men together that they are now. So I guess that's just my lesson. Like, we as moms, we've managed to save our addicted child's lives, but then we have to step back. So Eric is a therapist at Ethos, and a lot of you know him. Ethan is a therapist. And in 2020, I became a therapist. And Ethan, Tankel, and I are partners in our practice. And as Mallory said, the whole family has to get better. Like, that's critical. Like, everybody's on their own journey. But, like, you can't say, you, addicted child, were the problem. And we're going to fix you, and then everything's going to be fine. We all have to grow together because our addicted child is now a different person in recovery. And And we have to grow with them to accommodate their new selves and encourage their new development. And it's an opportunity for us to grow as people. In our practice, I see the parents and Ethan sees the kids. And and then every once in a while we bring everybody together, both therapists and both parents and the child, and we bring siblings in because everybody has to get better together. Like, whatever the reason that your identified patient started using, that's a reason that still exists, whether it's from an unusual trauma, like what happened in our family, or other families, patterns of behavior. It's important that everybody get better together. So my best advice is honor everybody, support everybody, get excited and see this as an opportunity to be a better, stronger family. And take care, moms particularly, take care of yourselves. Like right now, ideally, if I'd been organized today, I would be showered and my hair would look better. But I had the opportunity to go riding at 3:30 this afternoon in the pouring rain. So I was on a horse galloping through fields until 5 when it got dark, and jumped off the horse and jumped in the car and came home. But I made sure at the beginning of our sober journey that I took care of myself and that I nurtured myself, and I started riding again 20 years ago and haven't stopped. So and one more thing, where you are today, this is temporary. You don't know what it's going to be like. Like when I started my journey, if someone had just said to me, Liz, your family's going to be amazing. You're going to love each other in a deeper, stronger, and more intimate way. It would have been helpful for me to navigate this. I would have been like, oh, okay, all right, I can go through this horrible hell. But it's the unknowing. You don't know what's going to happen. And I can guarantee for so many of you, you're going to have a delightful ending that's going to surprise you. There's a funny card our son gave us a few years ago, and it's Wally, it's Mr. Cleaver, and he's talking to Wally Cleaver, who's looking a little guilty. And it says, Mr. Cleaver's on the phone, and he says, I'm sorry, officer, you must be mistaken. My son's at the library. And you open up the card and it says, are we at the point where we can laugh about this yet? And someday, believe it or not, you guys are going to make jokes about the crazy situations that you experience together as a family. And it's going to feel okay.
Thank you, Liz. Really appreciate you sharing your story. And I know we have definitely parents and siblings on, so I'm really glad that we have all of you sharing your experience and helping us out with that. See, I think parents so underestimate their young children and what they're absorbing and what they can handle. I mean, Liz talked about her much younger son, who was very cognizant of what was going on. And I saw Mallory's head bob. And you want to say something, Mallory?
Yeah, I'd love to. This actually just resonates with me strongly. I was actually at Karen's family education program a couple weeks ago, and it was a grandmother who had entered treatment. And I was sitting with her daughter, who was in her 40s and had a 6-year-old son. And the 6-year-old son had made a card for his mom to give to her mom when she was going to see her at their family session. And we were sitting next to each other at a break, and she decided to open the card just to see what it looked like before she gave it to her mom. And she was at this point telling me how her son knew nothing, and he knew that grandma was sick in the hospital, but didn't know why grandma was sick. And she opened up the card, and the 6-year-old had drew a picture of the grandmother in a hospital bed. The doctor was standing over the grandmother with a bubble above his head with a wine glass and an X through it. And the mom just started bawling, and she was like, I didn't think he knew. And we just had a long conversation that, especially working with kids, if they don't know the truth the story they'll make up. And I think this speaks to what you're saying. The story that you'll make up will probably be even worse. Like, my brother's just an asshole. Like, he's just a jerk and he's just making these terrible decisions. But in hindsight, he's a sick person who needs help. And I just think, yeah, there's age appropriate language for sure. But I mean, speaking for myself, I have 2 kids. They're 9 and 7. We have had these conversations since they were starting around 4 or 5, around how my brother's brain works differently. And when he drinks alcohol or uses substance, he tends to make bad decisions, and that their brain could be like that too. And we don't know. So, I think it just is telling, like the request, I love that, kids know more than you think. And again, the stories they're going to make up are probably worse than reality. So if we use age appropriate language, it's really powerful to give them some control and education too.
Yep. And you also described that that your sibling was being defended by your parents. And we definitely, I think I'm sure that I did that with my kids. I had my son who was my qualifier with the substance use disorder, and then my daughter who was the shadow child. At that point, they kind of had reversed roles prior to that, but that's another story. And I was definitely trying to explain to her, oh, this is because blah, da, 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 da. You need to understand. Well, I needed to really understand what she was going through, not just try to convince her that what was happening with him was going to be was explainable. I mean, it's good to explain it and to help understand it and include our other children in those conversations, but that's the defending piece of it. And I think that we parents are so desperate to have the Norman Rockwell